On a hillside in Louisville, Kentucky, there is a building that has been called the most haunted place in America. But forget the ghosts for a moment, because the real history of what happened inside those walls, the documented, verified medical history, is more disturbing than any ghost story. At its peak, this building was losing one patient per hour. The deaths were happening so fast, so constantly, that the staff built a secret tunnel through the side of the hill so they could move the bodies out without the living patients seeing them. They called it the Body Chute. It was 545 feet long. It ran from the basement of the building down to the bottom of the hill, where a railway car waited to carry the dead away. Every day, every hour, body after body, sliding down the tunnel in the dark. And that is not even close to the worst thing that happened in this building. This is the story of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. And as always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. To understand Waverly Hills, you need to understand tuberculosis. Because without understanding what tuberculosis actually did to a human body and what it did to an entire city, nothing else about this story makes sense. In 1900, Louisville, Kentucky had the highest tuberculosis death rate in America. Not one of the highest, the highest. In a country of 76 million people, Louisville was dying of this disease faster than any other city in the nation. Tuberculosis, known in the early 20th century as the White Plague or consumption, was caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The disease would typically affect the pulmonary tract during the early stages of infection, causing nondescript symptoms such as fever, malaise, and a phlegmy cough. However, as the disease proliferated within its host, the bacterium would infiltrate other bodily tissues through the bloodstream. Victims suffering through late-stage tuberculosis would often hack up bloody sputum and appear emaciated, their bodies literally consumed by the infection. The name consumption came from exactly this. The disease consumed you from the inside. It ate your lungs first, then it moved outward. It was slow, it was agonizing, and in the early 1900s, there was no cure. Louisville's stagnant air, industrial pollution, and overcrowded communities created the perfect breeding ground for the bacterium. Kentucky's lack of public health funding and resources also contributed to tuberculosis's rampant spread. The Ohio Valley geography trapped industrial pollution over the city like a lid on a pot. Workers in factories breathed contaminated air alongside contaminated colleagues. Families lived in small, crowded homes with no ventilation. One person coughing in a confined space could infect everyone around them, and they might not show symptoms for months, spreading the disease silently the entire time. Nearly 20% of deaths in Louisville were attributed to tuberculosis. 1 in 5 people who died in this city died of this disease. In an attempt to contain the disease, a board of tuberculosis hospital was established in 1906. The search began for a proper location to construct the much-needed facility. They needed somewhere elevated, somewhere with fresh air and sunlight, away from the industrial pollution of the valley floor. They found it on a hill in the southwest of the city, on land that had once been a private estate. They called it Waverly Hills. In 1910, Jefferson County built a small 2-story wooden hospital to treat tuberculosis. The region had one of the highest infection rates in the country, and doctors believed the area's fresh hilltop air could help patients recover. The original building was small, designed to hold 40 to 50 patients. It was modest, functional, and built with genuine care for the people inside it. The staff believed in what they were doing. They were trying to save lives at a time when saving lives from tuberculosis was almost impossible. And for a while in its early years, Waverly Hills was exactly what it was meant to be, a place of genuine care built on the most progressive medical thinking available at the time. That is the good era. Hold on to it, because it doesn't last. In 1924, 3 more floors were built because Jefferson County was facing a major tuberculosis outbreak. The small wooden hospital was completely overwhelmed. In 1926, the county opened a new 5-story brick hospital capable of housing more than 400 patients. Designed in a Tudor Gothic style, it included open-air solariums, wide balconies, and wards designed to capture as much sunlight as possible. The new Waverly Hills was enormous. 5 stories of stone and brick rising from the hillside, long corridors, patient balconies running the length of each floor so that patients could lie outside in all weather, because the medical thinking of the era held that fresh air and sunlight were the primary treatments for tuberculosis. The medical thinking was not wrong to emphasize fresh air. The problem was that fresh air was essentially all they had. Since antibiotics did not exist alongside the sanatorium's tenure, other forms of aid were used to treat patients, such as heat lamps, fresh air, and positive reassurance. Positive reassurance for a disease that was killing 1 in 5 people it infected. The patients who came to Waverly Hills came because they had no other option. Tuberculosis was so contagious that infected patients were legally required to be separated from the general public. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children forced into the sanatorium with little contact with their loved ones. You went to Waverly Hills not because you wanted to. You went because if you didn't, you were a danger to everyone around you. And once you were inside, you stayed inside. Because the illness was so extremely contagious, it was impossible to leave the sanatorium. And the deaths came, constantly, relentlessly. At the height of the tuberculosis epidemic, 1 person per hour died within this sanatorium. 1 person every hour, around the clock. The staff had to deal with this reality every single day, and they faced a specific, painful problem. The other patients, the living ones, the ones who were fighting to survive, could see when someone was carried out, could see the gurney, could see the covered body, could count the deaths. And every death they witnessed destroyed a little more of their will to keep fighting. The volume of deaths was so high that doctors worried about patients' morale and mental health and repurposed a tunnel that had been used to move supplies up the hill in winter into a discreet way to move the dead out of the hospital. The Body Chute, as it came to be known, was 545 feet long and used a railcar system to transport bodies from both the first floor and basement of the hospital down to the bottom of the hill, where they were out of sight and able to be cremated or collected by their families. Think about what it took to design and build something like that. To look at the situation, 1 death per hour, patients losing hope every time they saw a body, and conclude that the solution was a secret tunnel specifically for moving the dead so the living wouldn't have to watch. It was not a cruel decision, it was a compassionate one. The staff of Waverly Hills, in building the Body Chute, were trying to protect their patients from despair. They were trying to give the living something to hold on to. But the tunnel itself, 545 feet of darkness under the hill, with a rail car at the bottom loaded with the dead, became one of the most disturbing physical structures in American medical history. Here is the part of the Waverly Hills story that is genuinely, documentably horrifying, not because of ghosts, but because of medicine. With no cure available, doctors at Waverly Hills and at similar institutions across the country were desperately trying anything that might work. Some of what they tried was reasonable, given the knowledge of the time. Some of it was catastrophically wrong. And some of it was the kind of experimental desperation that, when you read it today, makes you understand exactly why the patients were so afraid. Let's start with the milder treatments and work our way up. Fresh air and sunlight were the foundational treatment. Patients sat in front of open windows for hours in the middle of winter. The idea was that cold, clean air would help the damaged lungs function better. In practice, this meant patients in advanced stages of tuberculosis, already weakened, already struggling to breathe, were placed in open-air exposure in Kentucky winters that regularly dropped below freezing. Some did improve. Many were further weakened by the exposure. Heliotherapy, deliberate exposure to ultraviolet light and direct sunlight, was used particularly for patients with tuberculosis of the bone, a secondary form of the disease that attacked the skeleton. The 5th floor of Waverly Hills was dedicated to this treatment. Then came the surgical interventions. The most infamous of these operations was known as the artificial pneumothorax, which involved propelling air into either the lung itself or the cavity between the lungs in order to artificially collapse the diseased portion of the lung. The hope was that the lung would rest, theoretically allowing the lesions caused by tuberculosis to heal. Amazingly, many patients did survive this procedure, but those on whom the procedure was less effective died a slow, agonizing death. Read that again. They were deliberately collapsing patients' lungs with air pumped in through a needle, with no general anesthesia available of the kind we have today, and no guarantee that the procedure would work. Their final days were restricted in various postures, lying on the side most affected by lesions, restricting the movement of the diseased lung with posture and gravity, in the hope the patient's life would be prolonged. Another technique involves surgically inserting a balloon into the lungs to fill them with air manually. And the most extreme intervention of all, thoracoplasty, the removal of multiple ribs with the intention of collapsing the lung. They removed ribs, multiple ribs, from patients who were already severely weakened by an aggressive infectious disease. The logic was sound by the standards of the era. If you remove the structural support of the chest wall on the affected side, the lung beneath it will collapse, reducing its function and theoretically giving it time to heal. But the procedure itself was agonizing. The recovery was brutal, and for many patients, the surgery was simply one more thing their bodies could not survive. Despite these treatments, more than 6,000 people died within the walls of Waverly Hills. 6,000 people in a single building, over 50 years of operation. When Waverly Hills shut its doors in 1961, it had housed approximately 50,000 patients over 51 years. 50,000 patients, 6,000 deaths. That is a mortality rate of 12%, and given that most of the patients who arrived at Waverly Hills were already in advanced stages of the disease, that number reflects genuine sustained medical effort to keep people alive. But 6,000 deaths, one person every hour at the peak, the Body Chute running constantly. In 1943, a microbiologist named Albert Schatz, working in the laboratory of Dr. Selman Waksman at Rutgers University, isolated a new antibiotic from soil bacteria. It was called streptomycin. Streptomycin was first administered to a human on November 20th, 1944, with remarkable results. Not only did the disease immediately stop its progression, but the bacteria also disappeared from the patient's sputum and the patient recovered fully. Everything changed. Within years, tuberculosis, the disease that had been killing 1 in 5 people in Louisville, the disease that had driven the construction of Waverly Hills, the disease for which there had been no cure for the entire history of humanity, was effectively treatable. By the mid-1950s, tuberculosis had been virtually wiped out from the Louisville area. In 1961, Waverly Hills Sanatorium closed its doors as a tuberculosis hospital. The building sat empty for 1 year, and then it reopened, with a new name and new patients, and a very different atmosphere from anything the original founders had intended. In 1962, Waverly Hills reopened as Woodhaven Geriatric Center. Woodhaven was meant to treat patients with dementia, mental illness, and physical disabilities. This is the pivot. This is the moment the good era ends and the bad era begins. And unlike the tuberculosis era, where the suffering was caused by a disease that doctors were genuinely trying to defeat, the suffering of the Woodhaven era was caused by something far less forgivable: neglect, budget cuts, and the systematic mistreatment of the most vulnerable people imaginable: the elderly, the mentally ill, the disabled, by an institution that had stopped trying. Woodhaven was constantly understaffed. Cockroach infestations, archaic modes of electroshock therapy, and other inhumane living conditions led to widespread patient neglect. Electroshock therapy was quite popular at Woodhaven, and the technique was being used to treat ailments of all kinds, even as punishment. If a patient didn't cooperate, electroshock was used to keep them in line. Elderly patients, patients with dementia, people who could not advocate for themselves, could not call for help, could not explain to anyone outside the building what was being done to them. The building that had been built to compassionately isolate the sick and had built a secret tunnel so the dying wouldn't lose hope was now using electrical current to punish non-compliant residents. Woodhaven was troubled by multiple budget cuts that made it difficult to properly care for patients, and abuses began. Eventually, Woodhaven was closed by the state of Kentucky in 1982 for patient neglect. 20 years. For 20 years, the building that had been Waverly Hills Sanatorium operated as Woodhaven Geriatric Center, and the state eventually had to forcibly close it because of what was being done to the people inside. The building sat empty again, and the stories began. Waverly Hills operated as a tuberculosis sanatorium until 1961. The thousands who lived and died there helped shape Louisville's medical history, and their stories, both tragic and inspiring, continue to echo through the halls. The building still stands. Standing high on one of Louisville's hillsides, Waverly Hills Sanatorium looms over the city like a ghost from a different era. It has been preserved, it is maintained, it is on the National Register of Historic Places. It is also one of the most visited paranormal destinations in the world. The Body Chute is still there. The notorious corridor is 545 feet long and descends to the base of the hill. Even now, reports of paranormal activity emanate from this tunnel. Shadow figures witnessed in the depths, dark presences manifesting as full-bodied apparitions. Room 502 on the 5th floor is the most infamous location in the building. 2 separate nurses are reported to have died there, one by suicide, one under circumstances that have never been fully clarified. Their stories have become part of the folklore of Waverly Hills, told on every tour, every ghost hunt, every paranormal investigation that has been conducted in the building over the past 40 years. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, standing in those corridors, knowing the history, knowing the Body Chute is below your feet, knowing that 6,000 people died in this building over 50 years, the weight of that history is genuinely felt by almost every person who visits. Paranormal investigators from around the world have conducted investigations at Waverly Hills. Television shows have filmed there. Ghost hunters have spent nights in the wards. The building has generated hundreds of documented accounts of unexplained phenomena: voices, shadows, cold spots, objects moving, the sound of children in empty rooms. Whether those accounts reflect something genuinely supernatural or simply the profound psychological effect of standing in a place saturated with suffering and death, they have made Waverly Hills one of the most famous buildings in America. But what happened in this building, the documented, historical, verifiable truth of what happened here, needs no ghost story to be disturbing. 6,000 people died of a disease that consumed them from the inside. Surgeons removed their ribs. Balloons were inflated inside their lungs. Their bodies were carried through a 545-foot tunnel in the dark so the living would not have to watch. And then, 20 years after the tuberculosis era ended, the building reopened and did something arguably worse. It used electrical current to punish elderly people who couldn't protect themselves. That is the real story of Waverly Hills, and it is more than enough.
Hello everyone, my name is Brian, and welcome back to the channel. Waverly Hills was built with genuine care and genuine compassion. The people who designed it, who built it, who staffed it during the tuberculosis era were trying to do something almost impossible: keep people alive from a disease that had no cure. And many of them succeeded. 50,000 patients came through those doors, and 44,000 of them left alive. But the building also saw 6,000 deaths. It had a 545-foot tunnel for moving bodies in secret. It had surgeries that removed ribs from the living. And then, after all of that, it became something else entirely.
a place where the elderly and vulnerable were shocked and neglected and forgotten until the state stepped in 20 years later. Both eras happened in the same building. Both are part of the same story. The Body Chute is still there, the wards are still there, and the building still looms over Louisville on its hill, carrying all of it. If you enjoyed this video, a like genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you have a story suggestion, the form is in the description. Some of the best stories on this channel have come directly from viewers. You make this research possible. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.